August the 4th, 2005, and as part of our Parents of the Field project, we're here with Professor Roger Fisher in his home on Martha's Vineyard, talking about the work that he's been doing in the past and talking also about the development of the possible field of conflict analysis and resolution.
Please call me Roger, if you will, Chris.
May I do that? All right, thank you. Okay. I want to reminisce a bit, if you don't mind. When you first came into this business or this field, how did you actually enter the idea, the practice? I mean, you were telling us you were a meteorologist, then you were a lawyer. How did you get embroiled in negotiation and mediation, which you've written about extensively? How did you come to be part of it?
Well, that's a good question. I came back from World War II. I've been an aviator flying, not a pilot, but an airborne meteorologist. I flew around looking at the clouds over the North Atlantic and how to make it safe off from the islands and the Azores, and then over Japan doing weather in B-29s, doing weather reconnaissance. I came back and discovered that my roommate and my closest friend, Dana Reed, had all been killed in the war by flying. And I thought, what a hell of a way to deal with our problems. I wasn't a pacifist. I enlisted, and I was interested, but I thought this was not a very good process. So I had applied to law school before the war, and I decided to go to law school focusing on international problems, international differences and conflict. And when I finished that, I was offered a clerkship, but I decided I'd go to Paris with the Marshall Plan, work on Harriman's staff, and deal with the world that was. So I spent a year and a half in Paris, and then I was coming back. I went to Washington, took a job with Covington and Burling, a law firm that did a lot of international work. So I was interested in international problems from the war on. And that, and I worked half a dozen years at Covington and Burling doing international cases, India, Pakistan over the Indus River, Iran, Afghanistan over the Helmand River dispute, Danish ships over the United States had seized them during the war and hadn't paid for them. I was working on international problems as a lawyer. Did that for half a dozen years, and then I was invited to argue cases at the Supreme Court, which I found. I loved that job. So I spent 2 years arguing cases in the Supreme Court. Harvard invited me to come back and teach, and I came back to teach. It really was, none of the cases I argued had been settled. All of them could have been settled. So one question in my head was, why don't lawyers settle cases? And that's how I got into the field of conflict. How do you negotiate and settle cases?
So when you came into it, what sort of a field was it?
Well, I don't know. I was interested in advising governments on how to do better. They hadn't done very well. My first book's International Conflict for Beginners. I said we're all beginners on the theory of how you deal with international problems. I was concerned with what, there wasn't much theory on how you ought to talk with each other, how you ought to listen, understand the other side's point of view. So I became interested in that, and when teaching it, became an academic at Harvard Law School, visiting for a year, and then made me a professor. Go ahead.
You became part of Harvard Law School, and yet you were interested in the dynamics and the problems of negotiation. How did that fit into a law school?
Oh, lawyers have problems. Every lawyer is dealing with a case. And the question is, how do you settle a case? How do you deal with it? And lawyers tend to think, we'll sue the bastard. We'll go right ahead. And I say, no, you got to understand their point of view and understand your own, and then figure out whether you can do something. How can you talk about it? Make sure you listen, understand their, don't just come and argue. And we argued to a judge. I loved arguing to judges. I spent a couple of years arguing cases, Supreme Court. I loved it. But when you're talking with somebody else, you're not just trying to persuade them, you're trying to understand. Even the court, I would ask, they'd ask me a question, I'd say, ask that again. I'm not sure I understand your concern there. We ask the questions here, you know. But you want to deal with a problem. You want to understand how the other side sees it. What I care about, what they care about. Not their position, not their posture.
So you came into the field mainly from law, but an interest in negotiation and understanding the underlying position of the other side as well.
Understanding the interests of the other side.
Okay. Yeah. Right. Your international conflict for beginners. Now, I remember reading that as a master's student. But I remember that you'd actually, I think, brought out another book before that, which I remember as an undergraduate.
Craigville, where somebody at American Academy asked us to come down and spend a month here in Cape Cod. I communicated from here, from the island by ferry boat, and go there and spend the day and come back. Most of them lived right there. And it was I had some papers a couple of papers, one on fractionating conflict, how you break it up into pieces.
I remember that.
I remember that there was a story, I think it's a true story, that a reconnaissance plane saw a Soviet trawler pulling up into Bedford man's lobster pot and eating the lobsters out of it. The plane was flying overhead and they saw this Russian pulling up the lobster pot. And so the dispute was, what should the United States do about this intrusion of its territorial waters? And I said, no, this is a dispute between a lobster fisherman man who ate a ship over a couple of lobsters. Let's don't get U.S. Soviet Union over territorial waters. Let's discuss a couple of lobsters here. This is the notion of let's break the problem down to pieces. Don't escalate every issue to be as big as possible.
Right. So you were at Harvard. You were in the law faculty. You were getting interested in influencing policymakers, and you were more than interested in negotiation and improving problem solving. Who else did you, from those particular times, who else can you remember as being somebody that had useful ideas for you? Did you?
Well, Ken Boulding was one I talked with a lot. And then Tom Schelling was at Harvard for a while.
Of course.
A good friend of mine. We spent time on some of those issues together there. Herb Kelman had his own seminar, and I visited once, I think, and talked to his group of students. He was a combination of research and doing it, but he's kind of embarrassed about doing it. I was no embarrassment about trying to make a difference. He thought, I'm an academic, I must study about conflict. And I should just incidentally talk to the Middle Easterners. I could incidentally have Israelis and Palestinians here. And I've much more thought of myself not as in an academic field, but as trying to develop ideas of use to people in dealing with their differences. How to improve the way they deal with their differences. Some theory about how do you, what's a good advice you can give to someone in a conflict? What's the best advice I can give? What would they do? How should they do it? And I was more interested very much in dealing with decision makers. Secretary Vance, at that time Secretary of State, had the house next door to me. I gave him a copy of a book called International Mediation, a Working Guide. Secretary Vance was living right near where we are, the next house up the pond where we are, like a friend of mine. And I remember his saying, we're going to have the Arabs and Israelis together. What should we talk about? And I said, the important thing is to learn you can't do much in 3 days. The conference always lasts no more than 3. You can't get heads of state for more than 3 days. He said, they're going to be here a week, Camp David. I said, you're going to get Sadat and Begin and everybody together for more than a week? Never happens. He said, they've already committed. We told them to pack their clothes for a week. I said, oh, let me think about that. That's you can do more at that during a week. You may be able to get them to start changing from face to face to side by side. How do we work together on this? I find that change of posture is critical. One of my students from the Kennedy School took a law school 3 weeks negotiation course I had, and he went back and became mayor of Quito, and then president of Ecuador. And he called me up and said, Roger, I just got elected yesterday president. come down. What should I do with Fujimori on this? What should I do? Jamil Mawad. I said, well, I love having an A student become elected president. Even better to have him call me up the next day and ask for advice. So I went down and talked with him, and I said, you're going to meet Fujimori. He said, oh yes. I said, well, don't just have it shaking hands, having it lined up together. I want a photograph taken of the two of you sitting side by side, working together. I want to change the posture of you, not just shaking hands, not just standing up in a line, but sitting down side by side. He said, there'll be photographers all over, I'll have one done. And he came back with a front page newspaper story, that photograph of the two presidents sitting down side by side, talking. And he said, you know, Fujimori saw that photograph. He said, you know what this means? This means we got to deal with these problems. We're not just who's winning and who's losing, who's going to back down. We're working on them together. That's that photograph tells the public we got to work. How do we settle these problems? And they met together several times during the next few weeks and settled every problem they had between the two of them.
Well, that's great.
And that's the satisfaction I get of getting one president to say, okay, let's work this out together. Let's sit down side by side, not confrontation, but side by side. That's what I'm interested in, developing ideas that have some merit to them, having some sense of this is a good idea, and then talking to people, trying to get them involved in those ideas.
Yes, I remember my old friend Jim Lowy, whom you know, I think, died 10 years ago now, used to be very insistent upon where you sat was very important, and how you sat and how you looked at each other was very important. So it's obviously something he picked up from you.
But I want them working together. I want to change. This is confrontation. I want them side by side dealing with, but the problem's over there. We're working on that problem together.
Now, you, I think, were one of the people who was the founder, a founder member, if not the founder member, of the program on negotiation at Harvard, at PON. Now, how did that come about?
Oh, I had students. We were working with Bruce Patton, was an assistant of mine. I knew him from college. He taught me an undergraduate course he was in. He came to law school and worked with me a great deal. He's still like alive a great deal. And we were trying to say we ought to do something. And Bruce came along, and we had lunch with Howard Rafe at the business school. And Bruce was there. And Bruce said, Patton said, we have to organize an activity, something that's going on. Not just you two meeting, but there has to be a project, a program, something, a project. So we called it the Harvard Negotiation Project for a while. And then other people came, and Frank Sander wanted to get involved. And so we had, well, there's my project, and there's a bigger program. The PON was an umbrella organization in which Bob Mnookin came involved, and others later as we got involved. But the notion was we had a project to see what we should be, and a project was kind of, our goal is to produce ideas about negotiating. How should they do it? Do we have any words of wisdom to say to people? It's not just studying about how they do it, but how do we develop the best advice we can generate? Telling people, if you want to negotiate, here's some things to do. Focus on your interests, not your position. Communicate, listen as well as talk. Build a relationship, side by side relationship. Separate inventing options from deciding, brainstorming from committing. In a meeting, people are often reluctant to put an idea out for fear of being tied to their name and it'll be their idea. And we say, no one's committed to anything now. Now we're generating ideas. So separate inventing from deciding. And then after you invent an idea, then you want to make commitments to it. All the time you're trying to build a relationship. So we got some 7 elements that we thought were critical in negotiation. You could teach negotiation by how people focused on interest, building a relationship, communication, and so forth, what they did.
And from that emerged getting to yes?
Yeah, that became getting to yes in due course.
Yeah. The thing that I always liked about that book was it was readable. Okay. Did you make a deliberate effort to avoid jargon?
It's one of the things of the book is not just to have an academic book on the shelf, but to have a book that people would like to buy. And read it. I used to read it aloud back and forth to each other. Every time you had a word you didn't like, or you wanted to shorten the sentence down, stop and mark it down. So you read it back and forth till it became so human conversational. It was not producing something, chiseling into rock of epic words, but you're trying to make it language that people use, a language that is easy. And reading it out loud, I found reading it out, manuscript out loud back and forth, every time either one wants to change a word, do it. Change it, make it more conversational, make it easier.
Oh, my old boss used to say, if it's not in the pocket Oxford English Dictionary, get rid of it. So, going back to something we were talking about earlier off camera, we were talking about whether, however it started and however you got involved in it and all of these other people, whether it's justifiable to call conflict analysis, conflict resolution, peace studies, whether it's justifiable to call it a field. And you have some views about that, which...
Well, sure, it's a field, but that's an academic problem. That's like, how should we organize these ideas at a university, at a school? What shall the books be about these ideas? My concern is, how do I get ideas of helpful to people? How do I don't care whether getting to yes is in a field or not. I want to have these ideas where people will pick it up, becomes a bestseller. That book continues to sell. It sells, was it 20 years out, or whatever it is? It sells 3,000 copies a week.
Really?
It's 150,000 copies a year, every year. And this is a very simple book. It's an airport bookstore, you know, so I'm picking up and read it. So my concern was not generating a discipline at Harvard, in the law school, and the negotiation field as much. Colleagues were concerned with that. I was concerned with improving our ideas and making them so useful. I remember one person, he said, "Oh, you wrote Getting to Yes." He said, "I want you to know I read that book. I knew everything in it already. I just didn't know I knew any of it." And I said, "Okay, perfect." These are ideas, organized common sense. People say, "I knew that. Didn't know I knew it." And it's not producing an academic field.
I'm going to press you a bit more on this field business, though, because whatever it is, one of the striking features about it is most of the leaders in it have always had this practical, policy-orientated side as well too, and I think that has made it probably almost unique. But there are these two elements which always seem to me to compete, and one is the desire to make it into a social science, and the other is the desire to have an impact. Now, you very firmly come down on the sort of impact side of things, but did you were at Harvard, you must have had pressure to become a respectable academic.
Well, I resisted that. Huh? I resisted that pressure.
But it was there, was it? Yeah.
Well, no, I wanted the ideas to be worth bringing to bear on the practitioner. So I was working to improve the ideas, but not just to improve the ideas to have a discipline and a nice scholarly book that said this is the way it's done. Scholars look at what is a great deal. What is the way it is? They're studying how it exists. I'm studying what ought they to do. How do we improve the way they deal with differences? How do we improve the skill people have in dealing with their differences, working together on? So I'm not concerned with, I've been much less concerned with building a field here, as making sure that my ideas, the ideas of those who work with me, my students and others, made a difference. It could make a difference in the world. It could do things. My problem I work on typically is people are not dealing with their differences as well as they should. And so I'm saying, what causes that? And the politician, the president, is busy dealing with the public opinion, dealing with his constituents. He doesn't want to, so he says, North Korea is doing it all wrong. And so that's no way to negotiate with North Korea, but it's a good way to go talk to his constituents. And so I want to get, how do I get the best ways to negotiate into the heads of the politicians?
Okay.
And the president believes that it's soft to negotiate. It's a sign of weakness to negotiate. You want to tell them. Now, there's nothing possibly worse than just telling North Korea what they ought to do. You ought to abandon your nuclear weapons. Now, if you're sitting in North Korea, you're listening to that and you say, what the hell?
Yeah.
If they want to talk to us, all right. Don't just sit back and order us to abandon our nuclear weapons program. But so the president is doing poorly, I believe, or the administration is doing poorly, because they see the problem as, how do we keep the constituents happy? How do we make, how do I look tough? How do I look proper? How do I do the right sort of stuff?
Yeah.
And I'm saying, we in North Korea have some differences. We ought to have somebody over there, not the president, but assistant secretary, listening to the North Koreans, saying, how do you see the problem? Here's how we see the problem. Let's sit and talk about it a while and see how we can deal better. See if we can develop a joint recommendation to make to our leaders on both sides. And that's big. So I'm constantly concerned with how governments and diplomats are not negotiating wisely. They're doing it wrong. Okay. I'm not concerned with how the field of negotiation is not being developed properly. Now, I've trained a lot of students. Some of them are interested in these problems. Some go to teach. Some are working consulting. Vantage Partners, Mark Gordon and the team, they fly around the world and advise governments how to do it, advise businessmen how to negotiate, what they ought to do. They're doing on. But this tension, I'm concerned with what we can say about the process that'll help people do it better.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to that, if I may, because I mean, my particular institute has that as a problem, and I need some advice on it. But maybe we can come back to that towards the end, because this whole sort of connection between, giving advice that people will listen to has created a real problem for us, and we need to sort of think about it. But let me come back to that towards the end, if I may, because I don't think we're in disagreement about what we ought to be doing. But I am just sort of interested in the development of your own thinking. And can we maybe go back to you're obviously very pleased with the impact that you had on the Ecuador-Peru border negotiations. Looking back over some of the things you've done in the past, some of the sort of practical ways in which you've helped people talk to each other and discuss and negotiate, what stands out in your own mind about things that you're most pleased of?
I think one is to have them see a problem as a joint problem, not as an adversarial.
Yeah.
The biggest thing with Ecuador and Peru was when President Jamil Mawad and Fujimori sat side by side. A newspaper photographer showed them sitting side by side working. The photograph was published all over. And they both began to realize our differences are a matter for the two of us to deal with jointly. And we have to work on them together.
Okay.
And let's get your ideas and my ideas and how we do it. That's what is the trick of what's needed to get things to work well. And what too often a leader says, well, I'm this country, we're supposed to tell them what to do. We have to tell North Korea what to do. We have to tell them. And they're not treating their differences as a shared matter of concern. They're treating it as something to argue about, like a win or lose, do battle with it. And so a large part of my work is trying to persuade people to work together on their differences. So I'm thinking I'm marketing the skill of dealing with differences.
Okay.
It's not the field of conflict resolution. Mm-hmm. And the word conflict resolution is funny. It assumes that a conflict can be anything from a difference of opinion to a war. Mm. And resolution implies it's all been settled. Mm. I remember 2 students of mine madly in love, a boy and a girl, male and female, and they were fighting in my office all the time, arguing back and forth, coming in. No, I'm talking to him first. Then one day the girl came in by herself. She said, Roger, we want you to be the first to know. We have solved our problem. We're getting married. I said, congratulations, sit down. I said, you will now have more issues to deal with. You'll have more children, where to live, what job to take. And there's no such thing as a resolution. The Middle East is not going to be resolved. There'll be Arabs and Jews there forever. They'll be dealing with their differences forever. And they have to improve the way in which they deal with their differences. And when people say, I'm going to resolve this conflict, the Middle East conflict, they got the wrong, it's not going to be resolved. It's going to be, how do we improve the way we're dealing with it? So that my concern constantly is spreading the skills of dealing with differences, practicing listening skills, understanding, paraphrasing back what you think you've heard, checking it out, listening in, jointly brainstorming. I'd like your advice. How do you think we should deal with it now? The best advice I give anyone is to ask for advice. I get the president of Ecuador and I say, you're meeting Fujimori? I say, ask his advice. Ask the other president's advice? I say, yes. You've had differences going on for 50 years. Ask his advice about how you should deal with these. Yes, let's have some ideas. And when you ask advice, you automatically indicate we're in this together. I want your ideas. And maybe I can have my advice for you. But we're working together on it. And that is the way differences work better. Okay. And so, to me, the getting people to understand that they want to work together, they want to ask each other's advice. That's quite different than saying, I want to tell the North Koreans what they ought to do is abolish their nuclear weapons program. I want people to become aware of the need of becoming skillful at dealing with the differences. Both sides, each side. Yeah. Each person can, I want to listen better, I want to understand you, I want to paraphrase, I want to ask your advice about what you think about this, and I'll give you my ideas I have and see if they work together. Let's see if we can deal with these problems. That is the essential skill of dealing with differences that I want to work. It's a shared problem. Okay. We have to work on together.
Right. Now, where do you think, in your past experiences, you've been most successful in getting that philosophy across to leaders and people? We've talked about Ecuador, you talked about...
Ecuador, fortunately, Jamil Mawad was a student of mine when he was a politician. Then he became mayor of Quito, and I was down there once at dinner with him in Quito. Then he got elected president, called me up the phone and said, Roger, I won the election yesterday, come down, and now we decide what to do. So there's a very success. Right. I think also, in a way that with Egypt, with President Nasser, I spent a couple of hours with him, personally working with him on it. And we hit it off very well. Yeah. And I thought I was set for the future. He died a couple of months later, surprise death, just a heart attack, I think.
Was that before you wrote Dear Arabs, Dear Israelis, or after? I can't remember.
Oh goch, I don't remember either.
Because that was another of your books that I read.
It's just another book, Dear Israelis, Dear Arabs. It's advice as to how letters to each of them. I wrote to an Israeli friend, to an Egyptian friend, to a Jordanian friend, to a PLO friend, these people I knew, saying, look, there's no solution. It's not going to be a conflict resolution as the feeling we side the whole thing up. We got married, that settled it. We solved this problem forever. And it's a process, endless process. And people want to get good at that process. They want to become skillful at dealing with differences, whether it's international differences, personal differences. You and I may disagree. Let's understand that. Go forward. But the resolution field has a notion, we're going to come and solve these problems. Conflict resolution, we resolved that one. Significant conflicts are dealt with. There's never going to be a solution to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Not going to sign a treaty and it'll be over forever. They'll have a problem the next day about discrimination, about immigration, the extradition of some suspected criminal, about violence of some group. And so the notion of conflict resolution, both words are bad. Conflict, I don't know whether it's a war or whether we're conflicting ideas. And resolution implies it's a once and for all settlement. And I'm trying to improve the field, if you call it a field, of improving the skills for dealing with differences and spreading those skills, improving the content of the skills, and then spreading them more widely.
Okay. Well, it's a good description, but you're never going to use it as a label, are you? Just it's not snappy, but I know what you mean.
Dealing with differences is pretty good.
Dealing with differences, okay, yeah. I remember many years ago when I was teaching in London, I actually taught in the Department of Systems Analysis, and I finally managed to persuade my head of department to allow me to put on a course called Conflict Management, how to manage your conflicts. And I remember talking to a member of another department, and he said, well, what course are you teaching? And I said, Conflict Management. And he said, what's that? And so I told him, something about negotiation and something about third parties, etc., something. And he said, that's not conflict management. He said, that's life. And I said, yes, but I didn't think I could get a course called Life through the curriculum board. So.
The difficulty I have with conflict management, and we had a conflict management group. I've sent organizations to this.
That's right, CMG.
There's a fear that people we're going to manage their conflict. That I am coming in to manage your conflict. Yes. And I don't want you coming in, Roger, and managing my conflict. Well, and so this is how we deal with our differences. It's a skill, becoming skillful. So managing our differences.
So how did CMG come about? Conflict Management Group. That was.
Well, some students. We set up a group of students that mainly formed a consulting firm, and the Conflict Management Inc. Wanted to be corporate existence, and board of directors, and then the group was an NGO. It was a for-profit activity. Conflict Management Inc. You'd advise businesses and managers how to deal with them. Conflict Management Group was a non-profit group. And now we've merged with Mercy Corps, and they've set up the Conflict Management Group as part of Mercy Corps.
Yes,
so
I heard
they're
that
having that activity for 1,000 people around the world. That's one thing they'll learn. I was in Istanbul this spring teaching 30 Mercy Corps people from Africa and Asia some of the theories of what we're dealing with on the ground, that they deal with conflict every day. It'd be nice if they could have not just development, building houses or whatever, they're helping with economic development, social development, but help them in the process of dealing with the people they're dealing with, how they do it better.
You said something a couple of minutes ago which I meant to sort of follow up on. Again, going back to the work that you did in the Middle East, you were talking about early contacts with, I still think of him as Colonel Nasser. I can't think of him as President Nasser.
President Nasser.
He was originally, he was Colonel, of course, wasn't he? When the British really disliked him. But you also had good contacts with the Israeli side as well. So for a while you were very, very closely working in that particular area. Did that last for a very long time? I lost track.
Nasser died.
Of course, right. And then Sadat came in.
Osama El-Baz was a student of mine at Harvard Law School, master LLM student. And he became assistant to Nasser, as well as assistant to the foreign minister. He had these two hats. So President Dadi worked in the foreign ministry, university, worked with President Sadat, and I met with him several times. Met Sadat through him first, and talked with Sadat somewhat. Never came as close to them. It's such the Arab-Israeli conflict is so deeply embedded in both sides that the leaders keep thinking the summit should decide it. And the summit is a very hard place to decide it. They should ask second-level people to work together and make recommendations. They should get a team, a joint working group of 4 or 5 people and say, look, let's see if we can make recommendations that we can get to both sides. And that's the process that's going to work better than when you get to the top. The crisis is so important that the President George Bush wants to decide this, or President Nixon wants to decide this. They come and yet North Korea, we should have second-level people talking with North Koreans and seeing if they have recommendations we can both recommend. And you want to separate in international diplomacy, as in so much, want to separate the brainstorming of possibilities. Formulating some specific possibilities, and then jointly recommending something to the leaders for their consideration. And it's really very useful. In fact, in mediation, I found when Secretary Vance resigned, Carter the hostages were being held in Iran, and President Carter decided he wanted to rescue them by helicopter. And Secretary Vance said, that's a very bad idea, Mr. President. And it's so bad an idea that I want to convince you, I take it so seriously, that if you try that, I'm going to resign. And Carter said, I'm President, I'm going to go ahead and do it. So he tried the helicopters. Of course, the streets were crowded up the minute the helicopters landed. Nothing happened. One helicopter couldn't work, and the whole thing was a failure.
It was a total fiasco.
Vance resigned. And Lloyd Cutler called me up from the White House. And he was the White House counsel and he said, Roger, you saw what happened? I said, oh, yes. He said, well, see what you can do. I said, you're serious? He said, see what you can do. You have no authority whatsoever. You have 24-hour-a-day access to me through the White House switchboard. If you want to talk to me, I said, perfect. I don't like authority. If I have authority, I have to put some limits on it. You can do this, but not that. If I have no authority, So I got a hold of the Ayatollah Vashti on the telephone and said, what do you want out of this hostage crisis? He said, we don't want, and I said, we'll start there. We don't want the New York courts deciding anything. We don't want this. So I listened to the Ayatollah Vashti for a while, and I said, well, what else do you want? Well, we want to be recognized as the government. The Shah's dead. The United States never recognized it. I said recognition. So we talked about what he wanted. And I got in the middle of this and talking back and forth and developed some ideas of what they wanted. Then I said to Lloyd Cutler, I need a mediator. He said, you're doing fine. I said, I'm a friend of yours. I'm an American. I want an Islamic government to mediate this thing. He said, no, let's not get them involved. Very political. I said, get me an Islamic government you would accept as a mediator. He said, call you back tomorrow. He called back and said, Algeria. I said, really, Algeria? He said, we are so different politically. We've decided to be very pragmatic on everything. So they said, we've been very pragmatic. So ask Algeria. So I got a hold of the foreign minister, and first the ambassador, and the foreign minister of Algeria. And I said, how about mediating? Seeing Iran would like you to mediate. He said, the United States wants us to mediate? And I said, no. The United States, I want you to mediate. Who are you? I said, I'm nobody. I'm a professor. I'm nobody at all. The suggestion is yours. Just ask, don't say the United States has decided. I'll talk the United States into it. I don't want to waste my time. I said, don't worry. I will see if the United States accepts you, but don't say the United States wants you. Try it out. So we got the ambassador to go to Iran. They said, all right. So the Algerian applied with the United States acceptance as a mediator, and lo and behold, the United States accepted them. And I got out. I handed over my draft and notes. Algeria took it over, went forward on it.
Yeah, it was Mohammed Sahnoun, I think, wasn't it? Was it Mohammed Sahnoun, the ambassador? I think it was.
I think so.
Yeah, yeah. I know him from way back, from when he was at the OAU. Yeah. No, nice. The other thing I was going to ask, because you were talking earlier about Camp David and about Saivance, and I have used a couple of times myself your idea of a single negotiating text. Now, was that something that you'd thought of before Camp David, or did it come up in Camp David? Where did you get the idea from?
No, it was an idea. We've been working on that, and we had at the International Mediation, I talked with Vance here at the Terrace. He talked with him, sort of showed him this notion, the power of a single negotiating text, that the third person shuttles with draft. It just goes back and forth. Not a proposal, not yet a proposal, just seeing if he can get better and better, and finally making a proposal or walking away. And that Secretary Vance understood that, and he got it. I'm not sure President Carter ever really.
Well, he still does it, you know. I mean, he still sort of. I was in a meeting with him once at the Carter Center, and he was talking about how he was trying to do one of his projects, I think in Africa, and he was saying, you know, I sit down with these two sets of ideas on my machine, and I sit down and I try to combine them, and it sounded very like.
Well, good.
No,
I talked with him. He's having lunch with him, and at his request, and sat down, and he had me help teach a class with his students when he was teaching, and he asked me to ask him, it would be an interlocutor to him, and the students were all there in their class, a lot of fun together.
Yeah, I have great respect for him.
I think he's less strong on theory than he is on rapport with people, on establishing the personal rapport.
Well, you know, that's a good thing to be good at, but I always think, even going back to your point about the need to help people develop skills to deal with the others and the difficult situations, that there has to be some theory behind the actual skills.
But no, I think it's a theory about interests, not positions. A theory about communicating two ways. It's not just telling, it's listening very carefully, understanding, learning. It's building a side-by-side relationship with them. So you're not this way, you're working together on that problem.
Yeah.
It's building rapport. It's brainstorming together and separating, inventing ideas from making commitments. You don't commit till you've got some very good ideas. And it's also the word we invented, BATNA, your best alternative.
Yeah.
It's funny, people really don't think of what they're going to do what's the best they can do if agreement doesn't work out. And that's the measuring stick all the way along. You want to say, my best alternative to a negotiating agreement with you is such and such. I'll walk away, I'll do this. BATNA, B-A-T-N-A, and the concept of your best alternative is not even understood widely. People didn't, and they negotiated, they didn't have the notion. We try to reach agreement. If we can't reach agreement, we leave. But
then what?
Then where do you go? Where do you go if you walk away?
Yes, I know my colleagues use that idea very much when they're teaching a negotiating class. Best alternative to no agreement. The other thing that I was going to ask you about was I've got a note down here. Have you ever talked a little bit with Hal Saunders? Because when you were talking about the sort of need for a dialogue between North Korea and this country to sort of brainstorm together, put me very much in mind of the kind of work that he'd been doing in Tajikistan and this extended dialogue. Have you talked to him?
Yes, no, I know Hal. Haven't seen much of him recently. We talked a good deal years ago.
Yeah.
And dialogue has the concept of two-way communication, and that's not negotiating. You're not yet now trying to produce an agreement. And I look at the goal of dialogue, I'm looking to understand what he cares about. I'm looking to understand how they see the problem, what the problem is. It's all the time. On the Iran, the Reagan administration said they were not going to, if Carter couldn't settle his thing with the hostages, he would not negotiate with Iran. He wanted to be tough. He saw negotiations being very soft. He was not going to. And his colleagues told me, I was working to try and deal with this hostage question. We had to settle it before he came in office, or not settle at all. I didn't like that kind of deadline, but I was pursuing it, and I got this deal worked out, and the State Department was working on it, and they were supposed to set up an escrow account in London so that the claims, if there was a dispute about whether the Shah had set up a bank account, whether it belonged to the government or belonged to the family, and if there was any dispute about it, they couldn't settle it, they go into escrow for the Bank of, at the Bank of England. And the day before the inauguration, my student in London called me up and said, Roger, there's no escrow account set up. I said, what? No escrow account? I thought they both talked to the bank. He said, oh yeah, Americans talk to the bank, but the bank needs a piece of paper. It has to have a piece of paper. What's it? I couldn't have the problem. Was there's no one Iranian in Washington except the International Monetary Fund had elected a director there. I got a hold of him at his house in Georgetown, and I said, what's the problem? He said, I'm not sure there's a problem. I said, there is a problem. Oh, there's a problem. I know what it is. It's the escrow account. I said, yes, that's the problem, but why? Interest. He said, Muslim countries don't pay or ask for interest. They'd know what to do. What instructions should they give on interest? I said, that's the problem. The inauguration at noon tomorrow. He said, well, that's the problem. So
how did you?
I called up at the Central Bank of Iran. It was 10 o'clock at night. Woman answered the phone. I said, sorry to bother you, but I want to talk to the president or the executive vice president of the bank about the interest on the escrow account. If he said, she said, they're in the meeting. I said, you're in the outer office? The other president's outer office. They're in a meeting right in his office? Oh, I said, good. Take a note in. Tell him I want to talk to one of them, either of them, on the phone right now about getting this escrow account done before tomorrow noon. She said, I won't. And instead of bawling her out, I said, you must have a very good reason for saying no. I wonder what that reason is. She said, I interrupted the meeting about an hour ago, and they said, do not interrupt this meeting for any reason whatsoever. So I'm not going to interrupt it. I said, bank's closed? Yes. You're in the outer office? Yes. Is there anyone else in the outer office? Yeah, there's a young man here. I said, good. I said, give that young man a note. Ask him to interrupt the meeting and say I'm on the phone, want to talk to them about the escrow account. She said, I could do that. I could do that. So she got this guy, no he wasn't, gave him a note. I held the line about 5 minutes from Tehran to here, Cambridge, and suddenly executive vice president's on the phone. He said, what do we do about interest? And I said, look, tell the bank, keep accurate track of any, if anything ever given to them, keep accurate track. And don't pay any interest to anybody, but keep track. When it's settled, that may be their fee, it may be something else, you work it out, but just, and he said, the bank needs a document. I said, can you get a, well, if that's what it says, the bank will keep track of the records and pay no interest to anybody. Discuss later with the parties if it becomes relevant. We can do that. And that could be done before noon tomorrow. Yes, we'll do it. We'll get it done. We'll get it done in Washington, London. So that's how it's never used as far as I know, because the banks either would decide it belongs to the government or it belongs to the Shah's family. If it belongs to the Shah's family, the Shah family can take care of that. If it belongs to the government, the government will agree what to do about it. But that's the kind of the conflict resolution. Piece by piece, wall.
Yes, what was it, Joe Nye's book, Piece in Pieces, or something like that?
Build a piece, piece by piece.
Piece by piece, yeah, I remember that. Looking back a bit again, you've wanted to help people understand how to deal with each other and deal with problems much more easily, and to develop some skills in this. How successful do you think you've been, and what have been some of the successes that you've had and some of the disappointments that you've had?
Well, I think that there are two aspects of it. One is developing the theory and practice. What are the right things to do? Okay. And then spreading these to government officials indirectly by word of mouth and so forth. So I think we've become, with colleagues, we've become fairly, that the Getting to Yes and other books indicate what you have to do. You want to, we call the 7 elements of negotiation. You want to establish relationship, establish communication, and so forth, go through. And I think on the substantive or the substantive process side, I'm getting those are fairly good. On the marketing of it, not as successful. I would keep thinking my client was the United States government, because if they can do this, that's everybody. And when Vance was Secretary of State, he was interested. I spent time with him. International Mediation, a working guide. He liked the book. I gave him a copy of it, and he's done something. When I was with Lyndon Johnson was president, he was very strong on the human relationship. He was, but he kind of abused it somewhat by leaning on people and pushing very hard on them. But I had access to his staff and getting some ideas in there and getting things done.
Looking back, we've talked about many of the things that you've done. Have you ever had anything which you look back on and were really disappointed about, that didn't quite sort of come up to your hopes and your expectations of those days?
I think I'm, in dealing with the United States government, I've counted on I've dealt with the days when Kennedy was president, and McNaughton was Assistant Secretary of Defense, and McNamara was Secretary of Defense. When I could come up with ideas and they would fly. I mean, they would go. I could talk to some of the White House staff, and it would be done. The idea would be incorporated. And I think I've become less market prone to the people of Republican administration, less concerned with how will they see these ideas, who could peddle them, who could ask more questions and get them going more. I think the hardest task has been, I find I have more success in dealing with foreign governments, Ecuador, South Africa, dealing with both ANC. I mean, I did a workshop for the clerk's cabinet, and did a workshop then for the African National Congress, a 4-day workshop, something like that, with a group of 8 or 12 people together, and that was done. I don't get, no one in the White House wants an invitation to do a workshop on how they do things. They're not interested, even the State Department. I haven't tried hard enough probably, but I've been disappointed that I've had much more difficulty getting the United States government to accept these ideas than Ecuador, Peru, South Africa, other countries.